Imperialism can be defined by 5 characteristics. I'm Paul Moran. Now, before I talk about how fucking stupid that way of qualifying imperialism is, I just want to show you the source of where Paul Moran got that from. And it is literally the Wikipedia article on the theories of imperialism. And then you go to Lenin, and then Wikipedia summarizes it with 5 aspects. I shit you not. This is where Paul Moran gets it from. I shit you not. Paul Moran's source in his video where he says there are 5 ways in which we can define imperialism. If I remember correctly, right? He gets it straight from the Wikipedia article that is trying to summarize one of the chapters in Lenin's work, Imperialism, okay? And this fucking idiot Paul Moran, he goes one by one through each attribute and through each thing, and he says, well, it's the presence of this, that checks the box. It's the presence of this, that checks the box. So first of all, I want to explain to you why a priori this is a stupid way of trying to define imperialism. So things like capitalism and imperialism are not abstract systems. They are historically grounded systems with lineages, with actual lineages. It's a real definite system. It's not an abstract system that pops up like mushrooms from every corner in the world indigenously and independently. No, I need people to understand the geopolitical reality of the evolution of capitalism. Capitalism as we know it, geopolitically, the same capitalist institutions of industrial England, which is where this shit started, world capitalism as we know it today. I mean, those are the same ones that rule today, pretty much. They just evolved into new forms. So there's like a direct lineage here, right? It's not like you have these alternative centers of global capitalism that emerged. No, it's one capitalism. So my theory that I want to emphasize is that imperialism is not an abstract system. It's a determinate system bounded up with definite institutions, a definite capitalist class, a definite history of states, and a definite evolution of a definite economic system. So once we get that part out of the way, we cannot begin whatsoever from this idea that imperialism can be defined by a set of qualities. And all we have to do is check the boxes to call a state imperialist or determine the motivations for what it does as imperialist. That is just a priori an undialectical approach. It's a metaphysical approach, okay? Imperialism is a definite living system. So the question of whether Russia is going to be imperialist or not is going to be a question of what relation did Russia actually establish to the system of global imperialism after the fall of the Soviet Union? That's the type of question you're going to have to ask. You're not going to ask, oh, let me look at Russia's economy. Are there banks? Are there monopolies? Yeah, no, that's not going to be anything close to a Marxist analysis of anything, to be clear. Like, not just of imperialism, but that in general of anything, whether it's capitalism or socialism. When you base these off of definitions, you're proceeding from a metaphysical basis, okay? So I've actually made a video about this. It's called A Marxist Understanding of the War in Ukraine. And I'm going to summarize Russia's economic system in the following way, right? Russia's economic system, we're going to call it a type of sovereign syncretic economy, right? What do I mean by that? So after the fall of the Soviet Union and the beginning of the era of privatizations, one of the reasons why people refer to an oligarchic class, both within Russia, but in addition also within Ukraine, right, is because in contrast to the Eastern European countries, they did not open their national monopolies to foreign competition. Ergo, they didn't allow foreign industries to dominate their economy. They privatized their economy, yes, but the bulk of their economy remained either Russian or Ukrainian or something else, right? So a pretty significant difference with the other ex-socialist countries, which is that the privatizations remained in the hands of some kind of indigenous class of rentier monopolists, right? Now you're going to hear the term rentier monopolist, and you're going to be like, oh, it's imperialism immediately, right? But imperialism is also a definite system of growth and accumulation, not just some system of property and acquisitions, okay? So what characterized the oligarchic class of both Russia and Ukraine for the past decades has pretty much been one of just stagnation, right? Just maintenance of their status quo. as far as the accumulation of profits is concerned, this oligarchic class has basically used these previously owned state industries as a kind of bedrock with which to use as securities or leverages in order to engage in other foreign financial adventures and investments. Okay? So this oligarchic class, in other words, was participating in the global imperialist economy, but as far as the national premises of their wealth are concerned, that was not an imperialist economic system. So the economic system that exists within Russia cannot be anything called Russian imperialism, okay? The reason it's not Russian imperialism, again, is because while it's a monopoly, sure, it's nothing close to a monopoly that defines its form of growth or its form of accumulation in terms of the acquisition of either territories or resources or foreign markets, okay? Which is going to be a really significant defining feature of imperialism. But I also want to add, and this is something that the revisionists who call themselves purists overlook, the prolet cult retards and others, they overlook the fact that when Lenin wrote the work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage, the whole point of that work was not to talk about, oh, there's this new oppression or something. The bulk of the thrust of his reasoning behind writing that book was he was trying to make the case that the end of the capitalist mode of production was imminent, and we are on the precipice of a transformation and a transition into a socialist mode of production. Now, whether you think Lenin was correct or wrong in his prediction, the qualitative change in global capitalism that happens around after 1929 and which consolidates after the Second World War was a qualitative leap into a new form, okay, of an economy. Now, I've argued that this is none other than the socialist mode of production, handicapped and, yeah, nonetheless superstructurally ruled by the vestiges of the former ruling class, which is still the ruling class, but it's using this socialist mode of production to fatten its own pockets and sustain the institutions of capitalism, like the Rockefellers, etc., etc. I've made that argument before. You can disagree with that. I'm open to disagreement. But we do have to accept that there has been a qualitative change out of imperialism, the highest stage, after Lenin. People it's fashionable to quote people today like Nkrumah, right? Nkrumah also made additions to Lenin's theory. But even Nkrumah's theory of neo-imperialism was centering around the role of developmentalism as a means of neo-colonialism, a fake developmentalism which places countries into the debt of foreign creditors. But already we're outside of or beyond Lenin's imperialism, because the whole premise of the foreign credit in the first place is the post-war Bretton Woods economy, which is based on developmentalism. It's based on developing the economies of countries around the world and that will be able to absorb shocks that happen in one of the various centers or poles of the global capitalist economy. So like if there's some kind of recession that happens in the United States, instead of the entire global economy going to shit, there's going to be all of these different centers and poles of the global capitalist economy that'll be able to absorb the shocks to the global economy. Okay, so already we're having this very strange global economic system that is not primarily based on, the redivision of the world in order to accumulate, in order to offset the falling rate of profit through the sale of commodities and through the capturing of new markets, competition for markets and for cheap labor, resources, land, and so on and so on. No, the world wars didn't so much end all of that as much as it led to a qualitatively new stage, which is the Bretton Woods system, which is under American unipolarity. And this system is primarily based in development. It's based on the development of economies. So it's literally based on politics, the government, and these New Deal social engineers and planners using their political power in order to artificially create these economic systems, right, from the ground up that will absorb systemic crisis around the world, okay? So that's a completely different thing. Then you might ask, okay, then how does imperialism evolve? Where is the imperialism? Because obviously there's still imperialism, right? Well, the imperialism primarily evolves into what we call American unipolarity, which is the ultimate monopoly of all. That monopoly primarily being a currency monopoly. The monopoly in the US dollar as the world's foremost reserve currency. The imperialist monopoly described by Lenin which is a monopoly that's based on cartels, and it's even a financial monopoly that's based on banks. All of this more or less culminates into the monopoly of the US dollar and the monopoly, moreover, of Anglo-Saxon financial institutions and banks. And then finally, even on top of this, the specific monopoly of the petrodollar after 73, the monopoly of that specific relation between banks and resources like oil, right? The leveraging of oil as a form of this kind of economic security with which banks use to derive credit, lend credit, etc., etc. As long as the profits in oil continue to be in the green, the rest of the economy seems to be okay, right? So this is a fundamentally, a qualitatively new system than just the imperialist one that Lenin was describing. So that much has to be totally emphasized, okay? So once we get that out of the way, we have to ask the question, what relation did the post-Soviet Russia have to this global economic system? And the relation was one primarily defined by the stagnation through privatization of the Russian economy and the usage of these Soviet industries and the Soviet economy, the socialist Soviet economy, as a security with which to derive and leverage other investments and other oligarchic financial ventures and so on, participating in the global capitalist economy. Now, all of that changes, however, with the nationalization of Gazprom by Putin. This finally establishes Russia as a definite counter-imperialist force or counter-unipolar force, because Russia now establishes its own sovereign relationship to the price of oil and the price of gas, effectively undermining that petrodollar arrangement and then the sovereignty of the US as the world's foremost reserve currency. Now, if you want to claim that Russia's imperialist, you're going to have to do the following things. You're going to have to demonstrate to us how it is that Russia's economy represents a new genesis of global capitalism, a new form of capitalist globality. 2, you're going to have to establish that the primary mechanism with which the Russian state seeks to achieve economic growth, ergo, the private Russian industries' way in which they're going to be able to realize profits, is going to be through the territorial division of the world. Okay? So you're going to first have to establish those two things. Here's my arguments against both of those. My argument 1 is that Russia's geopolitical resistance to the West, to NATO, and to American hegemony has come at the expense of the oligarchic class that exists within Russia. The oligarchs, as the Communist Party of the Russian Federation has pointed out, were against the special military operation in Ukraine. Millionaires today are fleeing Russia in droves. Russia's ruling class in general, the people that have gotten rich over the past decades, are the foremost fifth column that exists within Russia right now. And then I would argue that the current war in Ukraine, as well as Russia's ascendancy, represents the fertile soil for the restoration of a socialist system. And by socialist, I mean in the sense of China as a socialist system, a definite alternative to global capitalism. So Russia is building an alternative to global capitalism. Now, in order to establish Russia as imperialist, you're going to try to have to make the argument that Russia is just another imperialist power, including America. I mean, even if we were still living in the era of imperialism that Lenin was, that would not be true. Russia does not have the same relationship to the global financial oligarchy that, for example, even the Axis powers did in World War I, where they were all attached to one system. Creditors who were behind Germany's industrial development and Japan's industrial development and, Turkey's very limited industrial development and Austria-Hungary, these are all the same people. And it's the same institutions, okay? It's not like these are independent formations of the capitalist system. It's one global capitalist system, okay? Now, the first thing I'm going to establish is that in terms of the relationship between Russia and this global economic system is concerned, the more Putin represents a geopolitical revanchism, whether in Georgia or Ukraine, the more you have this kind of Russian patriotic sentiment and fervor and this sovereign independence of Russia, the more that has actually come at the expense of the oligarchic class within Russia and the Russian ruling class in general. And so it clearly speaks to the fact that Russia's complete isolation from the global capitalist market, which is what's going on right now. And by global, we're of course talking about the global capitalist market led by American unipolarity, because that is the only global capitalist market to speak of. That speaks to the possibility of the creation of an entirely new system. Full disclaimer, I don't think it's just going to be any old system. It's going to be socialism. So Russia's special military operation creates the foundation for Russian socialism. Socialism with Russian characteristics, similar to the Chinese. In no way can you say this is some kind of independent form of capitalist accumulation. No, it's not even that. It's specifically a complete new beginning as far as what shape Russia's economic system is going to take. Second of all, the idea that Russia is primarily fueling or planning on fueling its growth through the acquisition or territorial redivision of the world is completely false. A cursory glance at what's going on within the debate within the Russian state is concerned reveals that everyone's in agreement about the fact that the key for Russia's growth, and this is a marked departure from the type of economy that it had in the 90s, which was focused more on foreign markets, but Russia's growth is actually coming from federal-led projects. I think there's a total of 69 in total that were planned between 2018 and 2024. It's pretty similar to China's model of growth. The use of federal-led projects for the building of infrastructure and the building of big public works in order to drive and fuel economic growth. So that's not based on imperialism or foreign imperialism. Every single one of Russia's foreign interventions have come at the expense of both Russia's oligarchic class as well as Russia's economy. So Russia's intervention into Georgia didn't have some effect of offsetting the falling rate of profit. The absorption of Crimea did not do this. And certainly, I mean, what's going on right now, there's no chance that that's going to happen. So no, this is not about offsetting the falling rate of profit through war. This is something Russia's doing that hurts its profits. So here's my most scandalous take of all, okay? Russia's military actions are not only are they not imperialist, they're socialist. Because as Lenin pointed out, Lenin made this clear, by the way, and you guys have to actually read Lenin, because a lot of you motherfuckers are not reading Lenin. Lenin believed that while it was possible for national liberation to be accomplished within capitalism, he didn't believe that ultimately it would be possible for economic sovereignty to be achieved under capitalism. So what Lenin was saying was that, yeah, it's possible that we're going to have all these countries become independent under capitalism. But what's going to happen is that foreign capital from the European core is going to come and basically buy out and, you know, bribe the politicians and the state. And that's not something that can be dealt with from a purely democratic perspective. That requires some kind of socialism, right? Some kind of seizure of the economy by the state in order to establish economic sovereignty. That's what Lenin said. Lenin did not actually believe that an independent genesis of capitalism was possible by these various bourgeois democratic movements that were struggling against imperialism. Lenin didn't believe that, for example, the Irish bourgeois democratic struggle happening in Ireland could possibly lead to a unique Irish form of imperialism. For Lenin, imperialism was a definite system that had a center and it had a core, and that core were these financial institutions within Britain, within England, right? And then from outside of those, it diffuses down to Germany and elsewhere. But there's a core. There's a definite system. It's not some abstract principle or some abstract thing that is capable of independently reproducing itself elsewhere. Because according to Lenin, not even capitalism is capable of independently reproducing itself. That tendency for a new capitalist class to attempt to arrive, when Lenin said capitalism is always being reproduced, always, and by every minute, every day, and so on in the countryside, that's an aspiration, but it never comes into fruition without the political struggle to wrestle control of the state, right? When Lenin is saying capitalism is being reproduced in the country every minute, every second, yada, 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 he's speaking to this as an internal matter of national security within the Soviet state, not because it's going to transform the Soviet economy from within and just get rid of the project of building socialism, but that it's going to give rise to forms of power that will overthrow the Soviet state and which would inevitably subordinate Russia to the system of global capitalist imperialism rather than create an independent capitalist Russian state. Okay? So again, the theory of multipolarity is not only a theory of an elaboration of the struggle for national liberation beyond the framework of the nation state. The era of multipolarity is about the triumph and victory of socialism, the socialist mode of production. Polarity is almost indistinguishable from a socialistic form of economic power. And the reason why it's socialistic in nature is because a polarity, differs from imperialism and imperialist monopoly in the strict sense that it represents a form of developmentalism. It represents a developmental center that other countries enter into a relationship with as a matter of dependency in order to develop and modernize their economies. And it's also more than that. Polarity is also about a specific form of sovereignty in terms of currency and the significance of currency. Polarity is about establishing a sovereign pole for the development of your economy and the development of economies dependent on your economy, or economies that enter into relationships to your economy to offset their specific developmental unevenness. That differs from imperialist monopoly, which is just about profit. Imperialist monopoly is about profit. Now, American unipolarity formed because of profit, because of the need to sustain profits. Yes, no doubt about that. But the alternative polarities that are forming, and I would probably say right now there's one main alternative pole, which is China, is not about profit. It is primarily about development. Development has surpassed profit as the reason behind the economy's growth. So profits are no longer in command in a country like China, including, by the way, in the terms of how it defines its economic relationships to other countries. The ability to sustain China's model of development is behind the Belt and Road Initiative. It is not to offset falling rates of profit.